Chapter 3. Students Lead the Way. 4 black college students in Greensboro, North Carolina opened a new chapter in the Civil Rights Movement, February 1, 1960. They began with a simple but profound action, sitting where they weren't allowed. That afternoon, the young men arrived downtown at the Woolworth's department store. They purchased a few small items to show they were paying customers. Then, with pounding hearts, the neatly dressed teenagers took 4 stools at the store's white-only lunch counter. The waitress refused to serve them. Still, the Greensboro 4, as they came to be called, stayed put. They remained seated for an hour, until the manager closed the place down. In the following days, hundreds of others followed the lead of the Greensboro 4. Soon the sit-ins, as the protests were called, spread like wildfire to cities across the South. Black students brushed past, quote, whites-only signs at lunch counters, pools, libraries, and more. Unlike the Montgomery boycotters or the Little Rock Nine, these protesters were breaking the law. At workshops in Nashville, Tennessee, students trained in this form of protest, called civil disobedience. Activists learned how to protect their heads during a beating or throw their bodies in front of a comrade who was being attacked. They were given a list of do's and don'ts. Do be courteous, sit straight and face the counter. Don't laugh, strike back, or curse. Sit-ins often turned dangerous. The students were beaten, spat on, or burned with cigarettes or hot coffee. Police dragged them off their stools and shoved them into paddy wagons. As one group got carted off, another group took its place. Jail, no bail, was the students' motto. They refused to pay a fee to escape imprisonment. Filling up jails was part of the strategy to cause as much inconvenience and expense to a city or county as possible. The activists also considered time in jail an honorable duty. At Southern lunch counters, as they became integrated, sit-ins began winding down. By 1961, the Civil Rights Movement needed another jolt. James Farmer, director of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, had just the plan. Students and civil rights. Having college students as leaders in the civil rights movement made sense. Since they had no jobs to lose and no families to support, they could afford to risk time in jail. Students had not been bullied by decades of segregation either. At first, students considered forming a youth arm of Martin Luther King's group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but they voted to form their own group in April 1960, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called SNCC after the group's initials. Its tactics were more daring than King's organization. SNCC workers would risk their lives during the Freedom Rides in 1961. SNCC's focus was more grassroots as well. Its mission was to work with ordinary citizens instead of community leaders. The U.S. Supreme Court had banned segregation on buses and in waiting rooms that served interstate travelers. But in reality, whites-only areas were still the common practice. CORE planned a freedom ride to bring the matter national attention. A group of riders, both black and white, would turn segregation on its head during a bus tour of the South. Whites would sit in the back of the bus, blacks in front. At terminals, whites would use, quote, colored facilities, while blacks would head for whites-only ones. Farmer understood the danger of such an idea. We planned the Freedom Ride with the specific intention of creating a crisis, Farmer later recalled. But as the riders headed into the Deep South, they faced violence that shocked even him. A group of Freedom Riders found a mob waiting for them in Birmingham, Alabama, on May 14, 1961. As they stepped off the bus, riders were beaten with bats, bottles, bicycle chains, and pipes. The mob attacked them for 15 minutes before police arrived. It looked as if violence would put an end to the Freedom Rides. All but one of the battered CORE riders headed out of Alabama on an airplane. Only Nashville student leader John Lewis stepped up to continue the next leg of the ride. After riding their wheels, 10 more students joined him. The Freedom Riders went to Montgomery May 20th and were met by another mob. Alabama Governor John Patterson refused to protect the riders. Federal forces were sent to Montgomery to protect citizens acting on a freedom granted by the U.S. Supreme Court. That summer, the Freedom Rides continued without further mob attacks. By November 1st, more than 300 whites-only signs were removed from the bus stations. Among ordinary black Southerners, Freedom Riders became the words to describe any civil rights worker.